Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam and all constant readers the world over. My name is Jaime and Fuego. Bienvenidos to the horror show and welcome to my Sunday segment that airs every week that I so affectionately call Hail to Stephen King. And damn, has this been quite a year for the King, and yet it's had its ups and downs if I'm not mistaken, or at least in my personal estimation as somebody who has read all of his works from start to finish, and I am at the very tail end. I am rereading Insomnia right now because of the fact that we have spent so much time in Derry, Maine recently, but also just have End of Watch, and pretty much then I will be all caught up as we anticipate Sleeping Beauty's coming later this month on the 26th. My co-host Cecil Laird's birthday, as a matter of fact, and my little brother Johnny. Shout out to that guy as well. Love you, bud. But, so this video is going to be more of our continued coverage of the phenomenon that has been this new Andy Muschietti version of Stephen King's It. And basically this version, as I'm sure all of you guys have seen it, so there are going to be some spoilers here just in case you have not seen the movie yet. I'm going to be just talking freely. I'm not going to be attempting to spoil things, you know, in massive details, at least cognizantly, but we're just going to be chatting here, man. If you guys want to see a non-spoilers review, Cecil and I did one right after we left the press screening, on Tuesday night, so that was a few days before the movie came out, so we live streamed it, talked for over an hour, and I'll admit we spoiled like a little thing here or there, but it was not a big major spoilery review. We did not just go all out describing, you know, specific scenes or anything like that. We danced around a couple issues though, and then just this past weekend on Saturday we also did another live stream, which was finally getting to sit down with Marsha Parker, my co-host, who I did a retro review of the book because I just got done reading this monster up there, rereading it, I should say, for the second time. And that's the first thing that I at least want to mention here is that Stephen King's it's in my top 3. It's been there for a very long time. It's not really moved from the top 3, but it's funny how the 3 favorites of mine fluctuate, you know, just depending on if my moods or if I'm rereading one or whatever it may be. But I did a video about this early in this Hail to Stephen King cycle where I was like, Pet Sematary, The Stand, and It, those are my 3 favorite Stephen King books, and they're 3 of his most celebrated with good reason. And this was my first time rereading Stephen King's It, and doing it before the film and everything. I also rewatched the miniseries. We did a retro review of the miniseries also, where I think Cecil was a little harsh, and so was Marsha. But damn, Marsha was really harsh during the movie review of the most recent film. So in any event, check all of those out. I still have a big affection for the miniseries. I still have a big, I adore the book, and I really, really like the movie. It wasn't without its issues here or there, but as a whole, I really enjoyed the hell out of it. And I can't wait to also in this video look forward to chapter 2 and talking a little bit about that. But I have to pause real quick and say just how much I love it because of the sheer fact that the feeling that it left me with after rereading it for the first time. And so, just a little history. The original Stephen King interaction that I had was not the book, it was the miniseries, just like many children. And so, being 7, I think maybe almost 8 years old when I initially saw it, when it was first being broadcast on, it was ABC, if I recall correctly, and 2-part miniseries and stuff. But, long story short, being a kid and seeing an evil entity that killed children messed me up massively, as I'm sure it did, and that's why this movie just destroyed at the box office this past weekend. I couldn't even believe that industry people were projecting it in like 40, maybe 50 million. There were some people who thought they were being really bold by saying 60 or 70. This fucker did over 100 million. It did almost $120 million, guys. Seriously, get your mind around that. That's just insane. I think numbers here on Sunday are saying around 117, but I think that once like the final tallies are out with, you know, all the Sunday numbers being added as well, by Monday we're going to see well over 120 million. It did almost 200 million domestic, or excuse me, internationally if you include those numbers as well. It broke the R-rated Thursday record. It broke the all-time horror opening. I mean, this was a phenomenon that I was predicting. I'm like, this was a benchmark of pop culture that has only grown over the years. It messed people up like me when they were kids, and everybody wanted to see, you know, this new film and see how close it was going to be, how much they were going to alter with the fact that it was moving from the 50s to the 80s, which, when I first heard about this, was one of my biggest just, I guess, reservations about it, because I love the 50s nostalgia aspect of it, the Universal monsters that tied in so heavily with the plotting, and, you know, with just being the deep-rooted fears of the Losers Club and stuff. But in the end, I really enjoyed what I have called, in every time that I've spoken about this film since seeing it at the critic screening, it's an interpretation, it's not an adaptation. And so that's why I gotta call out Marcia, my beloved co-host. I love you, girl, but you really, these are the dangers of rereading a book, especially a massive tome like this that's like over 1,100 pages. It's almost 1,200 actually, you know? Rereading something of that size and that has so much rich depth to it, you are bound to be disappointed, especially when they're taking liberties with, you know, the decade changing and with certain plot beats and adding their own things and stuff like that. And so she mentioned many times that this was unnecessary that they added and this was unnecessary that they added, but I disagree, because it was its own thing. It was doing something different, you know? It's, you know. But in any event, the movie crushed, and, you know, we all know that to be the case. But man, I gotta say, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But, you know, consult those reviews if that's the case. But what it meant to me when I first read the book was something different, because when I first read the book, it was about 6, maybe 7 years ago. It was around the time when I first started going through all the King books and realizing the connections and the correlations, and that was why I decided to go book by book, because I wanted all of that connective tissue revealed to me, and to just get all of, I wanted to know everything about his multiverse, his, you know, interconnected universe of books and characters and ideals and mythology and so on and so forth. And so first time I read it, I was definitely much more connected with the kids, with the Young Losers Club, you know, which basically makes up half of the novel. And it's very cool in the novel, though, the way they tell it in a linear fashion, and yet they decade jump back and forth, you know, between the 50s and the 80s, and yet it's still being taught in a straight line, you know, like as they jump from decade to decade with the recollections. And so everything is moving forward in each of the two time periods, and they correlate in a very intriguing fashion. So when I first read it all those years ago, about 6-7 years ago, I identified so much more with the Losers, and it was almost like getting a director's cut of the miniseries, I should say. And so that's why, with not just King stuff, but if there's a property that I'm interested in, and I know that there's already a movie or a miniseries or something out there that's been adapted, I always go watch the visual representation first. And a lot of people disagree with me about this, but the reason that I do it is so that, especially if it's a, you know, if it's a 90-minute movie or a 2-hour movie or whatever, and then you've got this huge book sitting there, you know, 4, 6, 8,000 pages, whatever the hell it may be, you're just going to get an added, expanded version of that story in a lot of cases. Because in movies, we have to dial things down, we have to condense things. It's the nature of the medium. It's unfortunate, but I mean, that's why I think often novellas and short stories, when you can expand on things, as opposed to working within the constraints of a novel and deciding, okay, what's got to go on the chopping block and what's going to stay, what's the most crucial plot beats, and so on and so forth. So that's why I always like to watch the visual representation first and then go and read the novel. And in this case, I'm really glad that I did that with it, because I got just so much more, not just about the Losers Club and their home life and, you know, certain scares that they encountered and whatnot, but also in the novel you get so much more about Derry and the history and all the crazy shite that's been going down, you know, for not just decades but centuries in Derry, Maine, which is basically King's version of Bangor. And so I adored the book the first time that I read it, but I identified so much more with the kids, you know, just like I did being the one that saw it as a kid and identified with, you know, the fear of some otherworldly presence. Because I was that kid that slept with a nightlight until I was like almost 10 years old. I thought there was monsters under my bed and in my closet, and I had night terrors like a mofo, and I would wake up screaming about witches and demons and all kinds of crazy stuff, which is probably why I went into the horror section when, like, friends of mine would run into the 18 and over section and try to look at boobies. Not that I don't like those sorts of things and stuff, but my fascinations were obviously darker, and yet it's so funny how you can be enticed and interested by stuff that scares the crap out of you and yet be so fascinated in the same right. This is the thing, though. Rereading it, I identified, especially as a guy in his 30s now, I identified so much more with the adults. especially with them looking back on childhood and the wonderful friendships that they forged, and yet the fact that so much had been forgotten. And that as the book progresses and they're remembering more and more, and they're remembering this amazing, terrifying, life-changing, and just this experience that was just life-altering, in its entirety. And they're all experiencing PTSD from this, and that's why they've not just forgotten the incident with Bob Gray, Pennywise, whatever insane evil Deadlights entity, that interdimensional timeless traveler of evil, but they've also forgotten just the friendships that they had, and the fact that they all splintered off and whatnot and went their own separate ways and stuff. And so I was overcome, especially at the very end of the book, where Bill is going with his wife and trying to resuscitate her from this almost like trance-like state that she's been in since being exposed to the Deadlights, and where they all start forgetting each other at the end of the book after they've vanquished him, presumably once and for all, but evil still lingers in Derry, as you find out in Insomnia, and also in 11/22/63, which is a really, really beautiful cameo that you get from Rich and Bev, and they're dancing around when the protagonist meets them and stuff, and it's cute. But I identified so much more with the adults the second time, because there was so much about the book that I had forgotten. So I felt just like the Adult Losers Club, where I'd forgotten. I mean, there was the beats that were ingrained into my brain because I'd seen them in the miniseries many times and stuff before ever reading the book, but there were certain bits that I had forgotten, or that I didn't really remember so well, as some people talked trash to me about Trash Mouth status when I was doing the trailer reactions to this movie, and so it was such a melancholy but beautifully sad experience, because it really felt like it was that great snapshot of adulthood, and how as we get older we get so concerned with other things that these pivotal memories start to fade as years go by. And so that's why, I was very much like a Ben as a kid. I was a fatty with big Coke bottle glasses, shaved flat top head. I was a nerd. I didn't have a lot of friends, and even though I made massive efforts in my later teens and 20s and stuff to try to change my appearance and to forge a new identity and reinvent myself and the person you see before you now, I still feel like that person inside a lot of the time. And that's just the weird thing. And so, we can always change the way we're perceived by other people, but I don't know, it's a lot more complex of a process when you're trying to just get yourself to believe that you're no longer that person. But I think you need to hold on to those memories, and you need to embrace just those wonderfully innocent times of childhood, because the few friends that I had when I was a young kid and we were all into our video games and our comics and just the nerdful things, which shout out to Nerdful Things, by the way, and Flesh of Frankenstein, but those things that a lot of people may say they're all super popular now and whatever and in vogue, because look at how much comic book movies do at the theater. They crush now. Look at how it crushed at the theater, but nonetheless I still hold on to that person. That person still dwells deep within me, and so that's why rereading Stephen King's It just reminded me how much Stephen King's It, the source material, means to me, and how deeply heartfelt everything that King purports in that storytelling. It's a horror story that he described as his final exam about horror, but it really, at the end of the day, was in fact, I don't know, it's about just moving on into adulthood and trying our damnedest to not forget the beauty that was our childhoods, but the entire story is pretty much an allegory for loss of innocence and stuff like that. But whereas The Stand, I feel like, ends very hopefully in a lot of ways, even the cyclical aspect of the uncut version with Flag reappearing with the weird Aborigines or whatever. So yeah, The Stand ends very hopefully, in my opinion, that things can be reborn in a positive manner and whatever. Pet Sematary ends very darkly, very negatively, and everybody knows that King is so notorious for his silver lining and so on, and so much of his storytelling, and I can see why he's all drugged out and boozed out, and he writes this terrifying story with no happy ending, and it's super effed up, and he's like, nope, I can't release this, I'm gonna lock it in a drawer for a few years, and then he eventually ends up nutting up and putting it out. And it's probably, as far as an ending goes, at least, I mean, some of his short stories, actually a lot of his earlier short stories end very negatively, but most of his books end with that hopeful silver lining, and Pet Sematary does not. So that's where it is the strange one in the middle of my top 3. The Stand is positive, and there's an optimistic ending. Pet Sematary is like going against the grain, and it's got that super negative, like dark as fuck ending, but there's a very in the middle melancholy aspect that I mentioned earlier to it, and I cried when I was finishing rereading it. I seriously teared up, and I remember tearing up when I was at the end of the first time that I read it 6 or 7 years ago. But as I reread it this summer and finished it a couple weeks ago, it was tears of a different variety, because I had gone along on this journey and I was remembering so much that I had forgotten, just like the Adult Losers Club, and I was just sad about the fact that unless I continue to revisit this story often, there are certain beautiful nuances that will fade. And so it's such a great book, but it's an even better reread for me. So that is the first half of this video, which is basically what Stephen King's It means to me. And you guys can see that I have my 25th anniversary version, which is the one that I finally sat down and read in its entirety, as opposed to, you know, first time I read this baby. Second time this summer, I read Cemetery Dance. So shout out to Chismar and all those awesome cats at Cemetery Dance. I try to give you guys shout outs and love whenever I can, and you've obtained lots of my money at this point. So, hey, you want to sponsor Hail to Stephen King Weekly on the Horror Show? I'm just kidding. Every joke's half the truth, though. Also, one thing you can see in the center there is a fan comic, which, oh man, was done by a gentleman by the name of Vincent Rush, and Cecil and I actually do a comic review of that is going to be coming in a couple days here on the Horror Show as we round out our week of Stephen King It coverage. But so now let's talk about this Chapter 2. Yeah, that's right. It's still not officially confirmed. The sequel that is, well, there's speculation it's shooting in, it's supposed to start shooting in early 2018, but they gotta nail down some adult actors first and foremost. And but just to jump back to real quick, Andy Muschietti's version of it compared to when this project was first announced a few years ago. It's originally going to have a guy named Cary Fukunaga directing it, and Cary Fukunaga did True Detective, and you know, everybody was raving like crazy after the first season about that. But they ended up, over creative differences, deciding to go separate ways. The project was apparently, or presumably, dead for a little while, but then it was resuscitated, and you know, it started to float again. And lo and behold, we brought on the Mama director, Andres, aka Andy Muschietti, and he did an incredible job with this film. It was in the post-Stranger Things world where everybody is embracing the 80s culture so heavily. But you have to remember, this script had been floating around since 2014, long before anybody knew who the hell Finn Wolfhard was. So it's obvious that people will make comparisons and correlations between the two, but just keep in mind, there would be no Stranger Things if not for stuff like, you know, Stand By Me and It and so on and so forth, even the Goonies, and you know, just a lot of this 80s, you know, kid-centric stuff. Like, I grew up in the 80s, you know, and I identified so much with watching other kids my age having adventures of the spectacular, the fantastical variety. That was the stuff that I enjoyed the most as a kid, especially, you know, being someone living in, you know, the Phoenix desert and not really having a lot of adventures. I lived vicariously through my entertainment. And so I actually didn't reread, I read for the first time the Cary Fukunaga script that he co-wrote with a guy named, oh boy, his name is totally eluding me, Chase something. But nonetheless, this was Fukunaga's project. You know, he co-wrote the script, he was going to be directing it, and I wanted to take like a intense look and compare the two, I guess, and see just how faithful the Muschietti film was to Fukunaga's original vision that was present in this script. And honestly, it's pretty close, man. They actually did not really change very much from Fukunaga's script. Now, I feel like they beefed up the dialogue. I felt like it was vastly superior to the script that I read. But aside from that, and making the ending a little bit different, making the rock fight a little bit more traditional as opposed to in the Fukunaga script. There's like fireworks involved, and it takes place on the 4th. But I mean, many of the beats are the same. A lot of the structuring is the same, in fact. Now, they also added some interesting additional scares for the Muchetti version. And so, if I'm just gonna trace it through really quickly, like awesome beats like the Georgie being like a meat puppet in the basement, that was in the Fukunaga script, you know? Them all jumping off the cliff and stuff, and, you know, Bev just shows up and, you know, strips down to her skimpies and jumps out. That's in the script. The awesome scene at the Newald house with Pennywise coming out of the fridge, that's in the Fukunaga script. So, and there's a lot of stuff that they added specifically for the film, or for the finished film, I should say. Interesting stuff that was absent in the Fukunaga script was the leper and like any sort of prolific scare for either Richie or for Eddie, which I thought was a little strange. That, you know, that at one point in the Fukunaga script he alludes, Eddie, to having seen something at Newald Street before, because they go to the house, but the scene in the Muchetti film where they're at the house is far, far, far superior. So much better done. I don't know. There's strengths to both, I guess you could say. I feel like Mike Hanlon's character had a lot more to do in the Fukunaga script because it's actually his father that's alive, and so we get the story about the black spot, which is really cool. So there's a lot more weight to Mike's character. I felt like Mike and Stan both had a little bit more to do in the Muchetti script, in the Fukunaga script, and a little bit less to do, and were just kind of pushed to the side in the film that we all watched this past weekend. And so I like the ending in some ways better in the Fukunaga because it was a lot more, how do I say, faithful to the source material in some ways, and yet it also brought on a little bit more brutality and a little bit more... I liked the fight between the Losers Club and Pennywise in the Fukunaga script better. It's described in the script as like Lord of the Flies-esque because they all just get anything they can out of Bill, who is known as Will in that script, which is a little weird, but I guess William, Bill, whatever. But yeah, they've got like a sledgehammer and a car hubcap, and one's got a chainsaw, and, you know, one's got like a sharpened hockey stick that's into a stake, and so they've got all these weird weapons, and they're like this mishmash Lord of the Flies crew going in with all these crude weapons to try to destroy him. And I guess they kind of did that in the movie, but not in such an interesting array. And also, I like the fact that in the Fukunaga script they have the storm, and so the storm is actually just like when both the losers, as kids and adults, are going to confront Pennywise. There's storms each time. It wasn't really super stormy when they were going to go after him in the new movie, but yeah, it's storming, and it's also really cool because in the Fukunaga script they are all going to oh goodness, it's not a bar mitzvah, or is it a bar mitzvah? I don't know. It's basically where Stan is, taking his Jewish manhood and reading the Torah and everything, and so they're all in these super nice clothes, and they get all rained on, and they've got these weapons, and so they're dressed like super nicely, and I think that would be an interesting, kind of dynamic if they were in these nice clothes to be all dirtied out and with these crazy weapons and go to this fight and stuff. And so, yeah, they have their strengths. They both do. I must say, I like the end of the Muchetti film better because of the fact that it just kind of ends, as opposed to Fukunaga's script has that ending, but then there's something tacked on and happy afterwards, and there's much more of that silver lining kind of thing until the very, very end where you see a red balloon pop and stuff. So they both have their merits, and I honestly suggest if you guys just go do some searching on Reddit or, the interwebs and find that Fukunaga script that he wrote with Chase Smith, or in any event, it's a very interesting script, and yet I was really surprised at how faithful the Muchetti finished product really was. Many of the beats, pretty much all of the structuring is the same. They just sprinkled in some better dialogue at places, added some additional scares, added a lot more Pennywise though. And I know some people had mixed feelings about the amount of Pennywise that we saw in this finished product. Changed some of the monster encounters, like as opposed to a painting, Stan sees a naked woman. It's very reminiscent of The Shining, actually. So, guys, if you really like this source material, I recommend tracking down that Fukunaga script just because it's an intriguing comparison. The finished product is very similar though, much more so than I was anticipating. Bev's dad definitely goes more like the book in the script, and I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. And there is no group sex, guys, in the Fukunaga script. I know there was a lot of speculation about that. It's not in there. Not in there at all. So, that brings us to Chapter 2, right? Now, Chapter 2, once again, we don't know who the adult losers are going to be. We have heard them say that there are going to be flashbacks, though, and that there are certain scenes they already filmed during this production of Part 1, or Chapter 1, I should say, that are going to be in the second film, and then I'm assuming they'll also do some additional things and whatnot, hopefully as quick as possible, because these kids are like right on the cusp of aging and, you know, voices dropping and stuff like that, which is one of the worst things about the Dark Tower, is that you could tell in the reshoots that kid, his voice, the timbre had dropped a little bit. Don't get me started on the Dark Tower movie. You guys can see here on the channel my real thoughts about that film. But yes, I need to hold back all of that negativity because I really, compared to the Dark Tower, I mean, it's like comparing, you know, I don't know, like the convenience store wine cooler, whatever, that you pour in a styrofoam cup to a pretty good vintage, you know? I mean, not like the best you've ever had or anything, but something that is so much better in comparison that even the uninitiated palate would taste the difference. And so, Chapter 2, we're really wondering about Bowers, obviously, because he appeared to die, and in the Fukunaga script, he doesn't. In the Fukunaga script, not only does he kill his father, but he goes back to the house, back to the Bowers house. He's got the white hair. The police come and arrest him for the death of his father and stuff. So you know in the Fukunaga script, at least, and he is still out there and he is ready to terrorize them as adults, just like he did in the miniseries, just like he did in the books. So, curious what's going to happen there. I'm curious how much they will actually alter and change from the source material, because they really maintained the spirit in this interpretation that Muschietti did, but once again, it was not an adaptation, it was interpretation, and they changed a lot. Will they change something like the fate of Stan? Will they, I mean, how much will they go into, you know, stuff with Bev and Bill? I'm assuming a lot. Maybe they will have them have sex like they did in the book, even though Bill was married, and, I mean, Bev was escaping this negative relationship, and yet they still had to kind of come full circle and do what they always lusted after, I guess, with all those hormones as kids and stuff. But so I'm excited to see what happens with Chapter 2. I hope that they can get everybody back on board. They already, according to Deadline, have the same screenwriter returning, so that's all well and good. But who do we want? Who do we want for Chapter 2 for those adults, y'all? I know some people are saying, don't go with big names, we don't need big names, and maybe we don't, you know, maybe it would be cool to have a bunch of unknowns, as long as they crush it and they're late 30s, early 40s-ish, I mean, that's all that we really need, because we know this is going to be 27 years later and stuff, and that actually makes me think suddenly of a really funny beat in the Fukunaga script. So, Bev's mom is in the Fukunaga script. Obviously, she wasn't in the miniseries, and she wasn't in the Muschietti film, but she, since, you know, Beverly is like 13-ish, and she's, you know, about to have her first period and all that, and she walks up to her and she's like, it lasts for 27 days, and, you know, you lose, the most blood is lost at the end, and it was just a really funny little analogy that I saw in there. But so yeah, anyway, that's a little sidetrack, guys, sorry about that. So who do we want for the Adult Losers Club? I want you guys to let me know who you want in the comments below, obviously, but I'm gonna tell you who I want, and you can rack me over the coals for it, whatever, D-gaff, it's all good. This is just my opinion. I'm gonna start with the most controversial one, because as I talked with a few friends about this, they're like, no, not for Stan. Stanley Uris. Who do I want for Stanley as an adult? Honestly, I want Jake Gyllenhaal. I really do. Now, I'm not talking the Jake Gyllenhaal that we saw in, for instance, like I don't know, a Brokeback or, you know, any of the action stuff that he's done or whatever. I basically want him like Nightcrawler, Jake Gyllenhaal. I want him to be skinny and kind of have that sunken in look and stuff. So, I mean, maybe he's gotten better over the years, but you can still tell he's a scarred, scared, messed up individual that, I mean, let's say like he's got a cheery enough demeanor, but you can tell there's like just kind of like the dude's been through some shit and it stuck with him over the years, because in every incarnation of the story, whether it's, you know, the miniseries, the book, even the most recent film, Chapter 1 of It, what happened to him in Chapter 1 of It, that was actually one of my favorite alterations. I mean, when that thing was, you know, crushing, like sucking his face down, the crazy thing in the painting that everybody says is a tie-in with the Mama movie, because I haven't seen Mama yet, but I know I need to at this point. So, yeah, man, if that happened to you, you would probably look sunken and crazy and all that. And so that's who I want for my Stanley Uris. I want Jake Gyllenhaal. I know that he wouldn't need to be there very much unless they change things up, and maybe he doesn't kill himself right when he initially hears the news. Maybe they switch it up a little bit and he does it when he gets to the hotel in Derry, when he starts remembering things, you know. But I don't know. He was the first to walk away at the end of the Muschietti film, and then, you know, Eddie was the second to walk away, and Eddie, as we all know, you know, he goes. But who knows? They could change things. Maybe Eddie doesn't get killed by some big spider, whatever type thing, like in the book and in the miniseries. And so that brings me to Eddie then. Who should we have for Eddie? Who should we have for Eddie? I want somebody who's going to be a little bit shorter, who's going to be light on their feet, who's going to be sharp and smart, and yet fun and endearing and lovable. I want Elijah Wood. Yeah. And once again, all of these actors that I've chosen, they're all going to be in the late 30s to early 40s range by the time this movie is going into production. So all these people pretty much right now are late 30s, so like 37, 38-ish, like somewhere around there. So I want Elijah Wood for Eddie. I think he would be just great. He's a hell of an actor, and he's just got that charm and that look in his eyes and stuff that just really, I mean, granted, if you've seen, you know, something like Maniac or whatever, you know that he can go crazy. Also, Sin City, he was great in that as the silent killer. But I have always loved Elijah Wood, and I think that, at least in my head, if I'm thinking like bigger actors, he is the one that I want for my Eddie. So far, we have Jake Gyllenhaal for Stanley. For Eddie, we have Elijah Wood. Who is my number 3? Who is my number 3? Well, my number 3 is going to be Mr. Trashmouth Tozer, that's right. Beep, beep, Richie. Which, you know, can I say that I was disappointed that the only person who said beep, beep, Richie in the new movie was Pennywise, and none of the Losers Club where the term originates. Anyway, this is one that I think is also going to surprise a lot of people, but this dude is a hell of an actor, and he can play funny, he can play serious, he can play tortured, he can play, but I like him when he's at his more whimsical. And he also, remember, Richie had that kind of whimsy, you know, shit talking, you know, whatever. So he had like kind of a tough bravado in this, but you never completely bought into it, you know, at times. And so I want Paul Dano. Yeah, man. I think Paul Dano is a tremendous actor. You saw that in stuff like There Will Be Blood, but he can also do just whimsy, like The Girl Next Door, for God's sake, you know, where just the interaction amongst friends and stuff like that. I truly believe that Paul Dano would be a badass Beep Beep Richie. He is my choice for number 3, and I realize I've already gone like 30 minutes or so, so I'm gonna try not to take too much more of this, but this is the tail end of the video. So alright, that's right, Beep Beep Richie, Paul Dano, yo, that's who I'm going with. Now, next up, I have Mr. Handstrom, that's right, Ben from Soch, as Bev so affectionately called him, which was also in the Fukunaga script, although the Fukunaga script did not have New Kids on the Block in it. Yeah, they actually sprinkled in a lot more jokes in that, updated version of the Fukunaga script, but they really kept the skeletal structure. Anyway, Ben. Who do I want for Ben, you know? This is one of the few times where I actually think the suggestion of the little actor who played him, who I thought did an exceptional job, is right. I want Chris Pratt. Not gonna happen, but this is my dream casting, you guys, you know? I think of his chubby guy for Parks and Rec, man, and the earlier stuff that he did, but, you know, just like Ben, he is beefed up, and, you know, he's got the facial hair, and, you know, he's hopefully not gonna be like total super womanizer like the way John Ritter portrayed him and stuff. I love John Ritter, but that was one of the casting missteps for me that I just didn't like so much, guys. So yeah, man, Chris Pratt, he is my Ben Hanscom of the future. He'll be like, what, 40, early 40 or something by that time. So but he looks youthful and stuff. And, you know, I think all of these actors so far that I've mentioned, they will all just have that awesome youthfulness and stuff to them. Anyway, Chris Pratt for Ben, that is the next one for me. Next up is going to be Mr. Mike Hanlon. That's right, Mike Hanlon. There's been a lot of very, very talented young African-American actors that people have mentioned for him. The one that I want, though, the one that I think would be best is Donald Glover, man. I think Donald Glover with stuff like Atlanta and obviously everybody knows, you know, the Community show and stuff like that, but the guy has depth and weight, and I really can see him, especially when I see like Tim and the kid side by side who played Hanlon. Hell, he's even got the same last name. I don't think there's any relation, but same last name of the guy who played his grandfather in the film. And so, yeah, man, Donald Glover is my personal choice. Childish Gambino himself, although I heard he's not going to be doing music much anymore. But yeah, Donald Glover is my Mike Hanlon because of the fact that Hanlon is kind of a nerd in his own right also, and we know Glover has those leanings and those sensibilities and stuff, and I think that he would personally be great as Mike Hanlon. Next up, who do we have? Beverly Marsh, the affection of both Ben and Bill, and their love triangle I actually really enjoyed in the Muschietti film. I thought the kiss to resuscitate Snow White's status was a little cheese, but it made me smile, you know, because I was Ben. I was the one who, you know, was chubbed out and liked the girl, and I was peachy. I was the best friend who, you know, was never going to get any play. So that's why you have to take it upon yourself to, you know, take your appearance more seriously and stuff. But obviously, if you have a good heart, hopefully, I mean, sometimes these things, you know, shine through and stuff. And in the It story, they do, you know. But once again, Ben had to beef himself up to get some Bev play at the end of the day, despite, those ember fires and my heart burning there too. I wrote poetry to girls that didn't end up liking me too, so I can really, really relate. Secret Admirer, put it in the locker. I actually think in 7th grade when I did that with this girl, Susie Claire, I got the idea from it. Didn't work out though. Anyway, she didn't like me. Lastly, Beverly, and not lastly, but I can't forget Bill, but just getting sad thinking about my childhood, and that's what a good story does, is it makes you, you know, like reach back into your memories and whatnot. But I actually want a Jurassic World reunion. I do. I want Bryce Dallas Howard. That's who I want for my Beverly. She's beautiful. She's feisty. She actually has very, very good acting gravitas once again, and I think her and Pratt already with the chemistry and stuff. I mean, not that it has to be as big of a focal point, and I'm sure some people are gonna shit on me for this casting suggestion, but I was originally thinking the redhead from True Blood. I was thinking of the girl who plays Nebula, whose name I cannot recall, but they're just a little too young, you know? I was thinking Emma Stone. Once again, too young, you know? And so I also wanted to go with a natural redhead. I mean, yeah, she's a ginger for sure, but super, super pretty, and I think she is a hell of an actress. So that's right, Ronnie Howard's little daughter. That's right, Opie's offspring. That's who I want for my Beverly if I was casting this film. Now, last but not least, and this is maybe the one that I struggled with the most, and I had a completely different choice right before I did this video, like right before. My list was made. I had made alterations here and there, but I'd been sitting, after seeing the movie on Tuesday, on this casting, and I decided to change in the 11th hour. I'm not going to tell you who I was originally going to choose, because some of you may already be suggesting him as Stuttering Bill, but I don't want that original person. I want James McAvoy. Now, James McAvoy doing hell, maybe it could be the fact that he's been in London long enough, you know, doing this movie with his wife, that he's almost picked up like a little bit of the accent, like done a Madonna type thing or whatever. But James McAvoy, make him bald like he's supposed to be in the book. Not with that, I love my long hair, and I rock the Steven Seagal ponytail all too often, but I don't want that look. I want truth to the book. I want him to be going bald because of the fact that he's he obviously saw some shite himself, and, you know, he's so encompassed in his work and everything. So, yeah, I want James McAvoy, man. And I don't know if I would want, probably not shaved head, like split McAvoy. I'm talking like, you know, Dr. Xavier, like completely bald, you know, chrome dome status. So that's, or maybe like receding or something, I don't know. But still very thinning, short, like, you know, whatever, bald kind of look going down. So there is my Losers Club, guys. And this is definitely going to go down as one of the longest Hail to Stephen King episodes ever, and with good reason, because I really liked the Andres Muschietti version. My favorite will always be this guy right up here, but I felt like the Muschietti film really captured the spirit of the storytelling very well, despite being its own thing, and I can't wait to see what they do with this sequel. But I hope they handle it well. I hope they cast it well. I hope they script it well, and I have no doubts about the returning Skarsgård, because he did a great job, even if he was a little much at times, and he was in it a little much at times. I have no doubts about him, and, you know, him bringing it and everything, and them saying they're going to explore more of the history. Are we going to get a flashback to the smokestack? That was one of the things I was really sad didn't end up in this movie, because I love that trip out scene where, you know, Mike and Richie see him originally coming in prehistoric times and stuff. I thought that was pretty BA. So that was one of the few omissions that I'm hoping they flash back to in the stuff that they're hinting it's going to be more, you know, what is Pennywise, where did he come from, and, you know, motivations and all this other stuff. So that I'm excited for, wondering if Bowers is going to pop back up, but I just really hope that it doesn't go down just like the miniseries, as the kids were so wonderfully memorable and yet the adults were kind of eh. So I don't feel that way about the book. I feel like the adults and just catching back up with them is great. Catching back up with this story was great. It warmed my heart. It made me sad at times, but that good kind of sad, you know, like looking through, you know, old pictures of, you know, you and your friends when you were kids and stuff like that. So thankfully all that's documented on Facebook now. And one joke that I saw somebody say, they're like, so are all these kids supposed to have, you know, gone away and not kept up with one another on social media and whatnot? And then he was like, you know, talking smack, and it was like this big hilarious joke. And I was like, they all moved away in the 80s, you know, or early 90s or whatever, and, you know, they forgot not just about each other, but about the experience that they had together because of this PTSD. So when this jokester was going off about that, I'm like, are you that familiar with the source material, bro? Probably not. They didn't keep up with one another because they didn't want anything that was going to remind them about this horrific, terrifying, you know, experience that, you know, they don't want to remember. So I loved remembering this story, and especially aspects of it that had kind of slipped away as the years went by. So that is going to be me drawing the Wheel of Ka to a close here in all of its cyclical nature. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can always find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, relaunching a YouTube channel here very soon. I know I pretty much say that all the time, but that's because I'm still undecided about what I want my personal project to entail now, because essentially all that I was doing before was reviewing everything that wasn't horror-ish that I wanted to cover, but I really want to do something vastly different with my approach, and so that's what I'm wrestling with, and especially with as busy as the horror show is, and especially with going into October, that's where that's where the predicament lies. So, but, you know, interact with me on social media. That is my favorite place to discuss all things Stephen King and just all things of the scarific in general. Make sure to check out all of those 8 videos that we did, from the spoiler to the non-spoiler to the mini-series review to the book review to that comic review, which is going to be coming, to the VR that we did. So it's been a pleasure covering this property. I love Stephen King. He's my favorite author, and I'm actually going to be seeing him September 29th, just outside of the Chicago area. So if any of you guys are going to be at that particular signing and kind of book tour speech thing that he is doing, he's going to be there with Owen King. I'm going to be documenting the entire experience for Hail to Stephen King. I can't wait. My pilgrimage to see El Rey. It's going to be glorious. So until next installment of Hail to Stephen King, Sin Amigos, I have been Jaime and Fuego. I hope that we see each other sooner rather than later. Hasta luego until then, and remember, stay scared. Come float with me.